sila. And parang somehow nagkaroon din sila ng false sense of humility because in the first place parang what happens is that it's pride na it is an actualized pride because on one hand it is a pride in a sense na you don't want the help of others, especially if you are if you feel that you are ignorant, and then you don't want to seek the aid of others, and on another sense a pride in a sense that you don't want to share something that you know towards the other. So yes sir, from the maybe just to to clarify or to validate your the observation niyo po Sir Jovi and Sir Blaze, it actually happens po talaga in the perspective of the students po. Yun lang po muna for now. Thank you po.
Salamat Sus for that. Yeah, I mean, part din kasi I think yung ano nagiging the idea na it seems like a competition. I think that also adds to it, or maybe how since day one how some people have treated education. I mean, students have some students treated education na, and it doesn't help minsan yung we have lists of who are the top students. Honestly, when I was in elementary, ganun Tapos and then entering the seminary, high school, all of a sudden it seemed like a very small game. 30 in a class, okay, pagalingan. And then with that type of attitude, we eventually enter, for example, in college, like university setup. Just to add to it, maybe kasi that how education has made us respect or not respect learning itself. Tuloy, how I would approach lessons, I would still carry that 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 game-like attitude. Na okay, am I the smartest person in the room? Who is the smartest person? Who is the best person in the room? Some people would have that disposition. Yeah, pusillanimity. At least we have some very concrete ideas of or experiences of pusillanimity. Would someone want pa to add to it? So I just have like just one last thing to say.
Dagdag, Anton.
Sige po, Dok.
Gusto ko lang, although nasa ibang parts na to ng essay, pero we can probably parang anticipate the discussion of this point. Yung from middle towards the end of the essay kasi yung ipinapakita na ni Professor Konyndyk yung distinction between the position of Aquinas and Aristotle. And the distinction really has something to do about yung reference, no? Yung reference point of being magnanimous in Aristotelian context. And yung magnanimous in the sense of Thomistic context or Aquinas' context. Kasi yung magnanimity kay Aquinas includes humility. No? Pero yung humility, hindi nga siya self-deprecation. No? Hindi nga siya self-undervaluing. Anyway, we will come to that point a little later. Kaya ako lang nire-raise lang ngayon just to provide context to what I intend to say. Yung nabanggit ni Anton, yung ating hindi lang overemphasis kundi yung how do you call it? Yung obsession with achievement. At tapos yung achievement na yun is always tied up with, yun nga, public recognition. Yung sinasabi ni Anton na yung awards, di ba? imagine yung mga tinuturuan natin sa senior high, sa college, and even sa graduate school. Marami rito yung produkto ng edukasyon magmula preschool na kahit hindi nagsasalita may award kung most behaved. O pagka naman hindi nag-aaral pero sali ng sali sa kung ano activities o most cooperative, parang gano'n. Kaya pagdating ng high school o ng college, hindi mo sila nabigyan ng award o na recognition, they take it against you. And they think na yung moral growth or even academic growth is all about recognition. Yun yung ayaw ni Aquinas kay Aristotle. Kasi sabi nga ni Aquinas, as presented by Konyndyk, ultimately, yung magnanimous, yung megalosokos ni Aristotle is all about public recognition. It's all about parang if you tie it up with the current culture, it's all about the number of likes, di mo? It's all about the number of positive comments. It's all about public adulation. Ang sinasabi ni Aquinas kasi na magnanimous person, the person who is capable and ready enough to do something, even that something goes against public adulation or public notion of virtue or public notion of meritorious. Yun yung wala kay Aristotle. Ngayon, parang everything acquires the quality of a virtue if it has a ready audience, di ba? If it has the potential of getting accepted by a large number of people. So becoming virtuous or promoting virtue these days even becomes more problematic and challenging. Kasi ngayon, ang primary standard of virtue or merit is public adulation. So, yun muna.
Thank you, Doc. Sige, Jim.
Hello, good evening po. Just to connect something to what Doc Jovi have said about recognition. So I think the vice of pusillanimity can lead to a certain kind of passivity. Yung sabi nga kanina, yung a certain kind of inaction. Parang may gusto kang sabihin, pero wala kang confidence na sabihin. Parang wala kang lakas ng loob na sabihin. Because you are conscious of what others might think of your thought. Is it acceptable to the majority? Parang is it palatable? So pusillanimity as a kind of passivity can also result to a kind of self-pity or low esteem. And from that kind of passivity, it is implicated that we are creating a false image of ourselves and as well as others. Parang ganun.
Salamat, Jim. Yeah, but also at the same time, parang nabanggit nga kanina na it is a passivity. It's an active passivity. It could also be that way in the sense na I purposely would not act, not because I look down on myself, but because I think I look down on others. Ba't ako makikisawsaw? Alam ko someone will make a mistake. Let me wait for that mistake to happen first. Kasi alam ko kaya ko sabihin na yung tamang sagot. Hintayin ko muna na there is someone that I could laugh at. Yung parang it could also be that way, Jim. So I think, I mean, from what you've been discussing earlier. So that's nice. I mean, a pusillanimity based on self-pity, but at the same time, an idea of pusillanimity that is based on an overemphasis of oneself. So I'll just read this part here. So The difference between Aristotle's and Aquinas's view concerning this is radically transformed, she says, because in that context, Aristotelian magnanimity, notwithstanding its merits, in counteracting pusillanimity, will turn out to be more a vice than a virtue, and Christian humility, which Aristotle cannot countenance as anything but baseness and vice, becomes for Aquinas not only a virtue, but an essential complement to magnanimity. Of course, the key transformative feature of Aquinas' account of pusillanimity and magnanimity is its acknowledgement of our fundamental relationship of dependence on God. So, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that is a very important thing for this essay, as later, as it would be pointed out later. Okay, so I think that's what we could cover first for the introduction. If no one would want to add, we could turn to Blaise, because Blaise is in charge for this next part. Blaise?
Yeah.
Salamat, bro.
So I'll start with the second paragraph. So pusillanimity results from measuring our value in comparison to others, and negatively so. The faint-hearted person is one who, when considering some action, looks around, sees others doing a much better job, is certain that she will look inferior in comparison or fare poorly by their standards or expectations, and therefore decides not to make the attempt. So ito nga yung sinasabi ni Doc Jovi kanina, and yun naman yung ina-emphasize din naman ni Anton. Let me just continue. She shrinks back from acting because her measure of herself and her contributions depends on a horizontal standard of comparison. Moreover, her worries about others' opinions and expectations of her can additionally trap her into measuring her worth by the wrong standards of greatness. According to both of these comparative measures, she finds herself wanting. I just want to take the point of horizontal standard of comparison. I think pusillanimity is something that lacks transcendence. Why? Because it seems to me that pusillanimity stops on the level of what is merely sensible. We compare ourselves, or the pusillanimous compares himself or herself to his or her peers. And because of that comparison, because of that over comparison to others, he or she becomes blind to her self-worth, to her value. And in turn, he or she becomes blinded to the gifts that he or she possesses. So let me continue. A further pusillanimity results from the wrong sort of self-reliance. In contemporary America, independence is the premier virtue. Each of us is valuable and valued for autonomous achievement, not for depending on others for help. For the pusillanimous person, to ask for assistance and therefore to admit that she needs it would be to admit her inadequacy to others, something which she cannot bear to do. In this particular point, the pusillanimous is someone who is arrogant and full of himself. He or she is not really someone who is humble and someone who underestimates himself or herself, but someone who does not want to show that he or she needs help. So that is pusillanimity in the eyes of Aristotle. Should I continue, or are there any questions?
Yeah, just
or perhaps additional reflections?
Oh, I'll just add something siguro, Blaise. Siguro, I mean, this is what Jim was mentioning earlier, yung idea ng self-pity, at least yung the first thing that you've read, Blaise, yung measuring our value in comparison to others and seeing ourselves na well, I'm not as good as other people, and I'm lacking something. But what I just to add what you said, yung dito sa second third paragraph of this part, yung it verges din sa yung sa nabanggit ni Doc Jovi kanina na bakit naman ako magtatanong ng ba't naman ako manghihingi ng tulong? Why would I ask for assistance? Ba't naman ako manghihingi ng tulong? Because it is, and then she uses kasi yung context ng American democracy na I'm a successful person if I could, the whole idea of the American dream, I'll just work hard, I'll just do it by myself, I'll be able to buy a house, a car, and then I'll have a family. So I'll do it by myself. I don't need the help of the other person. Yung two sides, I think it's something that that she really is able to point out here. On the one hand, yung nabanggit ni James atin kanina, yung self-pity because of that horizontal standard of comparison. But at the same time, I mean, push to an extreme yung self-pity and nagiging hindi, yung the insistence of the pusillanimous person on a completely individualistic ideal of human action. And then it becomes complicated because it's coupled with her negative comparison of herself with others and her dependence for esteem on their apparently unachievable standards of worthiness cripples her incentive to act. Parang nagiging cycle siya tuloy, no? If we look at it and how she presents it here, nagiging cycle siya na because I have that view of myself vis-a-vis others, I am pushed into this cycle of how I would act, how I would perceive others. I mean, I think it would be yung idea of resentment from how Nietzsche would talk about it. Resentment. I see myself completely inferior. I mean, it does something to me. I just want to point out lang, sorry, before we move on. I appreciate nalilimutan. Konyndyks use of her here. I don't know kung napansin din ng ibang tao. She uses her for the pusillanimous person, and then she uses he for Aristotle's version of the magnanimous person. But later, Aquinas' remedy, she uses again she in reference to the Blessed Virgin Mary. Just to I was able to appreciate what she did there. Sige. Would someone else want to add before we proceed to the next part? Sige po, Doc.
Ako ba yun, Anton?
Yes po, sorry. Doc Pao, yes po.
Hi, hello everyone. I was listening to Jovi's comment earlier, and then also si Jim, no, and I was quite interested about the idea of public adulation. I was wondering whether, and anyone could respond to this. I was wondering, and of course my comment is just based on that the comment of Jovi earlier. I'm just wondering whether there's a difference between, or whether it's possible for us to make a difference between yung binabanggit nila kanina, yung acceptance via public adulation and recognition. Because recognition, public adulation, I think, is a false kind of recognition. Not really false. Yeah, pwedeng false, pero parang it's not the recognition that one needs. I wonder if we could talk. It's possible for us to also talk about, recognition that does not necessarily require public adulation. No, yung sinasabi ni Jim kanina na yung if I can remember correctly, yung example niya na yung mga estudyanteng nahihiyang magsalita sa klase. But so my answer, that's the first question. My other question then is if it's possible for us to talk about recognition that does not require public adulation. In what form I cannot express it at this moment. How should we then recognize other people without without public acceptance, na yung public flattery, yung binanggit yung kanina na yung daming awards and so on. Sige, my thoughts are really not coherent at this point. So if you can help me, maybe maybe we could pursue that discussion.
May I respond to Sir Pao, Andon?
Sige po, Dr.
Thank you, Sir Pao, for bringing up that point. No? Siguro po yung I would like to think na somehow I get a glimpse of where Sir Pao is coming from. Siguro yung recognition that Sir Pao is suggesting is something that we won't see in Aristotle's sense of magnanimity or megalosukos, the great-souled person. Kasi doon sa Aristotelian context, the only person who can recognize the great-souled man is none other than himself. Yun nga yung ayaw ni Aquinas doon sa notion ng megalosukos ni Aristotle. Kasi ultimately, parang he alone becomes the standard. And in a sense, isa ito sa makikita nating constraints or limits ng virtue ethics ni Aristotle. Because in the end, while there is merit in saying that virtues can be personified, pero may limit din kasi in the end it's the great-souled man or the megalosukos that becomes the standard himself. Bakit ito risky or dangerous? Kasi this is the kind of ethical climate or political culture that opens up to idol worship. Ang mangyayari, everyone simply wants to be their idol. Everyone becomes para bang a secondary version or a mimesis of the great-souled man, whether that great-souled man is authentically a great-souled man or a great-souled man only according to his self-projection. So, sa context na yon, siguro hindi natin makikita yung the kind of recognition that Sir Pao is hinting at. Sa context naman ng great-souled man ni Aquinas, of course, we won't encounter the term recognition or not even the dynamics of recognition that Sir Pao is suggesting. But there is something that is close to it, and it's a notion that Rebecca Konyndyk introduces in this essay. The term she uses to introduce a notion comparable with recognition is none other than dependence. It might sound as, or it might come to some people as rather weak. No? How can dependence be ethical, or how come dependence suggests virtue? Pero dito makikita yung parang a very clear delineation between Aristotle's notion of the human person and Aquinas' notion of the human person. Dahil kay Aristotle, the human person is self-equipped. The human person is self-made. Kaya nga yung sabi niya na sa discussion niya, both ethics and politics, ang paradigm ng politika sa kanya is none other than friendship. And when you ask Aristotle what friendship is, he would describe it as a kind of a unity or relation among equals. In other words, this is a relation among self-made individuals. Si Aquinas does not think of the human person as isolated islands. When he thinks of the human person, he thinks of the human person as para bang situated right away in a societal relationship or in a communitarian relationship. Again, we must recall that Aquinas is working against the background of medieval culture. Sa medieval culture, dito natin nakikita yung emergence of the so-called guilds. Lahat ng ginagawa, lahat ng any human industry imaginable is represented by the so-called guilds. In fact, the university itself is an example of those guilds. So in Aquinas' imagination, the human person is always a part of a larger group. And as a part of that larger group, whether it's a family or an army of warriors or a church or a community of religious priests or a guilds of professors or a guild of merchants, he's always situated there, and that is where his dependence is coming from. Ang tingin ni Aquinas, yung individuals who are parts of this larger group or larger community, they are dependent on each other. And it is on each other that it is on their dependence on each other where their perfection as individuals or moral growth as individuals lie. So yun yung, like I said, that's probably the closest to the kind of recognition that Serpao is looking for. It's more of a recognition of one's dependence on others. Kaya kay against Aristotle, yung mga non-citizens in Aristotelian context, like yung mga PWD, yung mga widows, yung mga babae, yung mga slaves, wala nang pag-asa maging great souled man yon. Kasi pabigat sila sa lipunan as far as Aristotle is concerned. Pero itong mga taong ito, in the context of Aquinas, yes, they may not be great-souled men, pero they have the potential to be great, no, in the Christian context, precisely because of their capacity for humility. Hindi ko muna ipipursue yun kasi I might say too many things already. Pero I'll stop at that point. Others may react.
Sige po. Thank you po, Dr. Fee. Doc,
Thank you, Jovi. Of course, we'd like to hear the others share their thoughts also. Just a quick response to Jovi. I really like the way you you illustrated what I think is and correct me if I'm mistaken. What I think is a kind of alternative reading of Aquinas, no, with regard to, I mean, well, recognition or what you mentioned earlier, dependence. And I was waiting for it. And then you mentioned it, and I was quite happy that this idea of dependence is based on a kind of communitarian concept of well, communitarian concept of interdependence. So it's not dependence. I think well, it is dependence uh, and interdependence, and of course, it's an analogy, possible analogy for the idea of recognition that I'm borrowing from Axel Honneth, because Honneth also has this idea of well, these ideas of recognition and mutual recognition. So if you can use dependence as an analogy, then recognition is to dependence and mutual recognition is to interdependence. But either way, the community is presupposed. And yeah, I think that's a very fecund idea that one can pursue, no? This alternative way of talking about the self, which is not entirely metaphysical, and I'm glad that it's coming from Aquinas. Um, and of course, the idea of dependence, I think, is not public adulation. And of course, some might be confused because public adulation happens within a community. But that's the irony of, I think, recognition, is that it does not presuppose the fake, uh, shallow type of flattery. You know, uh, it uh, rather, and I don't have the words to describe it yet. Rather, recognition or dependence is something more fundamental than public flattery or public adulation. So doon lang muna. And of course, I'm waiting for the others to share their thoughts also. Thank you, Anton. Thank you, Jovi.
Just ano lang po, I think it was Blaze who gave the imagery of yung classroom po. At hindi si Jim. I just
Oh yeah,
remember.
yeah. Because I came in and then you were talking about the classroom, so di ko alam kung sino yung nag-umpisa. So anyway, thank you kung sino Blaze, or si Jim. Thank you.
Sige. Thank you po, Doc Pao. Jim?
I agree with Doc Jovi and Doc Pao. So the vice of pusillanimity presents us the problematic of not only recognition but more on self-recognition, as well as the false recognition of greatness that mentioned a while ago, the horizontal standard of comparison. So you do great things not for the sake of greatness or virtue, but for fame, for honor, for reputation, and the like. So, and I agree also with you, Anton, that this false recognition of greatness can also result to a certain kind of resentment. So, Dr. Pao mentioned a while ago Axel Honneth to the struggle for recognition.
Salamat, Jim. Yeah. I mean, all of these thoughts. Kasi I was thinking about also yung but anyway, I'll just add to it later na lang. Would someone else want to say something first? Kasi I think Blaze would continue. May isang part pa po si Blaze dito before we proceed. Kasi it now we're going to look into Aristotle's remedy to this type of vice. Kung at any moment, if someone would just want to participate or to join or to say something rather, just please feel free to raise your hand. Sige, Blaze, could you itong last part?
Yes, sige. So after presenting the problem with pusillanimity, Professor Rebecca already started to show us what is the remedy as far as Aristotle is concerned. Let me just read the first paragraph. In both Aristotle and Aquinas, the vice of pusillanimity is opposed to of magnanimity by way of deficiency. Faint-heartedness is opposed to magnanimity's greatness of heart, its confidence in facing difficult achievements, and its love of truth that blocks fear about what others might think. First, the magnanimous person aims at great acts of virtue, and his desire for honor spurs him on to attempt things genuinely worthy of honor. On this, both Aquinas and Aristotle agree. However, the magnanimous person is not a slave to the desire for human honor, and a claim, in fact, he despises them if they come from unworthy sources or on account of things for which honor is not genuinely due. So I think this is what Doc Bolaños was telling to us earlier. Na dapat it is not about uh, it is not about an honor that is cultivated uh, in terms of a servile kind of praise. So a magnanimous person is not desiring such kind of flattery. Also, it is quite obvious that someone who is magnanimous is not someone who is vain about his achievements. Na kumbaga, ibrabrag niya na I got this one, I got that one, etc., etc., that I am better than anyone else. So I think that's the point, and it was a great point by Doc Pao kanina. Let me also continue. The philosopher's view of magnanimity simply does not make much of human opinion. In his commentary on Aristotle's Ethics, Aquinas' gloss says that the magnanimous person is more solicitous about truth than about human opinion. He does not depart from what he ought to do, either by excess or deficiency, because of what others think, because of his allegiance to truth, including the truth about himself. The magnanimous person rises above the anxieties of a comparative view of his own worth. Let me just share something when I was just when I just started teaching. So I applied for philosophy course in senior high school, but then the load that was given to me was theological course. So it came to a point wherein I asked some of my co-faculty members, but I will not mention their names, of course. If I have to, that time kasi, no, we have to discuss about the sacrament of marriage. And I was asking them, should I discuss about the issues on same-sex marriage, the issues on other things about the church? Evaluation period that time, evaluation week. Sabi nila, sabi ng isa, it's up to you kasi kung ako yan, I wouldn't dare kasi yung ibang mga students dyan sensitive and yung delivery dapat wag na natin pakialaman yan kasi baka yung evaluation natin pabangit. So I think dito sa point na to, dito sa binasa ko na to, someone who is magnanimous is not someone who is a pleaser. On that point, kung concern ka sa evaluation mo as a faculty to the point na ayaw mong ituro kung ano ba yung dapat ituro. Ayaw mo ituro kung ano ba yung truth, at least in the eyes of the church. Kasi natatakot ka na baka yung evaluation mo as a faculty ay maapektuhan. It is something that is alarming. And to be honest, I was disappointed back then. And so I stubbornly discussed it anyway. It depends on presentation, I think. And yeah, yun siguro din yung sinasabi na kailangan we have to subordinate, we have to subvert our freedom to truth. And if we know that it is something that's true, and if we know that it is our duty, then we have to do it, even though it does not please other people. So let me go to the next point. The magnanimous person has a moderate attitude about riches and the like, because he does not regard honor as the greatest good, but rather the virtue which makes one genuinely worthy of it. Greatness is not measured by celebrity status or by how much the hoi polloi are impressed by one's wealth. Aristotelian magnanimity has a more noble view of what makes one truly great. Lastly, Aristotle's magnanimous person is not the lone ranger when it comes to accomplishing great acts of virtue. Without a doubt, the magnanimous person seeks to be self-sufficient, but self-sufficiency in Aristotelian terms contrasts sharply with an American-style denial of our dependence on others. And so, Aristotle says it is more easily sustained in the company of friends who share one's good character. And I think when we say that friends who share one's good character, it is a kind of friendship wherein they also criticize each other. It is not the kind of friendship wherein there is a kind of passive support, in the sense that even if you do something evil, even if you do something that is wrong, they would support you because they do not want to offend you. The kind of Aristotelian friendship that we have here is something that is higher than what we usually think of a friendship. So I think I'll go to the summary. In summary, Aristotle's magnanimous person acknowledges that he depends on others to become virtuous and to exercise virtue, but he is appropriately independent of their opinions and their standards of greatness in assessing his own worth. Because of this, he is able to avoid the damaging forms of comparative self-value and self-reliance that are the pitfalls of pusillanimity. Aristotle's megalopsukos moves beyond the comparative self-value in one way, and certainly beyond a negative comparative self-assessment. His sense of his own excellence still depends on thinking of himself as superior to others. For example, the magnanimous person likes to do favors for others, but not to receive them, because benefiting others is a sign of his superiority, while receiving help is slavish and inferior. I think this is the point where St. Thomas Aquinas would depart from. And I think Dr. Jovi also gave us a glance of this particular point of Professor Rebecca. So that's all for my part in this particular section of the reading. And I just have a question at least running into my mind. Before I applied for teaching dati, natatandaan ko ng GPR pa, and then Doc Pao was still in the process of drafting the speed and its impact. I think that's the title of the article. To be honest, di ako makarelate that time in totality. But then, nung nakapag-start ako ng pagtuturo, no, na ganun pala kalaki yung impact talaga ng speed sa atin. And yeah, doon ko rin experience yung pagpupush na kailangan maging pleasing doon sa stakeholders, yung naririnig nila sa atin. And I think, are we not reducing ourselves into, instead of being a philosopher, are we not reducing ourselves into a sophist? So that's my question for this particular reading.
So, salamat, Blaze. Yung wait lang, na ko dun sa huli mong sinabi yung sa sophist. But I just want to connect it sana dun sa sinabi ni Doc Pao earlier. Kasi I put a note here kasi the idea of the magnanimous person, for example, of not receiving favors from others, but this is a person who does favors. What came to my mind here was the whole idea of meritocracy. Okay, parang you become someone because of who you are, because of what you can do. But at the same time, I mean, it presupposes or it presumes a hierarchical order. It's as if you are already at that stage, you don't need help from other people. And this is something I think that we really see, maybe more so in Philippine society, diba? I mean, once you step in a particular situation, gusto kong gumamit ng examples, pero I mean, you are bestowed an award, or you receive public recognition, to use the example earlier. It's as if it's something that characterizes you fully, na yung hindi na nakikilala ng ibang tao who you really are, but nakikilala na lang nila who you are in relation to that position, that prize, that public recognition that you have amassed through the years, or because of something that you did. I mean, that type of view. Sige po, Doc Jovi.
Pagkatapos mo na, Anton.
Yun lang, Doc, actually, yung sa hierarchy. Okay.
Two things siguro yung gusto kong i-share, and I'm sharing this as a kind of a reaction and extension likewise to what Blaise was saying a while ago. And what I am about to say is something theological, kasi yung towards the middle up to the last parts of the essay, Konyndyk pursued yung theological insights of Aquinas, no, to further amplify his deviation from Aristotle. I'd like to begin doon sa reaction ko kay Blaise. No? Thank you for sharing that experience, Blaise. Yung parang lahat naman yata ng teachers guilty of that, yung teaching for the sake of good evaluation. In fact, yung iba talagang kinakalendaryo yung lectures nila to make sure na yung the easy parts and the interesting parts are delivered during evaluation season. So, hindi lang naman ikaw ang guilty doon, Blaise. Pero meron sa sinabi si Blaise na sa tingin ko needs further elaboration. Yung sinabi niya na at that moment where para bang he wanted to discuss marriage yata, di ba? He nonetheless proceeded in discussing it without regard to its impact on his evaluation. Parang bahala kayo dyan, basta I want to discuss marriage, I'll do it. And he considered that as an example of para bang the attitude of a great souled man. And like I said, that point raised by Blaise, sa tingin ko, requires further elaboration. Kasi hindi lang siya merong Aristotelian tone, meron din siyang parang Kantian tone, di ba? Yung doing something for the sake of doing it, no? Or for the sake of duty, to be more precisely Kantian. On that score, you would think na merong a kind of a similarity or resonance between Aristotle and Kant, at least dun sa issue ng great souled man. Both of them are saying na the purpose of doing something virtuous shouldn't be any form of public affirmation nga, or public merit. It should come from the pursuit of virtue, nothing else. And again, just to highlight the point of Aquinas, Aquinas is not taking this route. Una-una, hindi siya naniniwala na the virtuous thing or the virtuous act is done for its own sake. Walang ganun kay Aquinas. It's always for something larger, something greater. In theological parlance, yung something greater, something larger, he considers it as God. So walang, in other words, I just would like to delineate the position of Aquinas and the position of Aristotle and Kant on the other side. And then, hindi lang yon, yung kay Aquinas, he does not think that yung great-souled man in the mind of Aquinas, he does not think that this great-souled man is self-sufficient. Sa imagination ni Aristotle, yung great-souled man talagang, yun nga talagang self-made, talagang complete. Pero kay Aquinas, yung kanyang great-souled man has a keen awareness of the limits of what he can do. Importante kay Aquinas yun dahil yung kasing awareness ng great-souled man na to the limits of what he can do. Doon pumapasok yung discussion ni Aquinas ng grace. And it's not only Aquinas who recognizes this inherent limitation of the natural capacity of the human person. In one of the writings of Cornel West, for example, Cornel West recalls yung sense of failure ni Franz Kafka. At sabi ni Cornel West, ngayon na we belong to the so-called achievement society, parang failure is something that parang it's a kind of a disease that all of us are avoiding. In fact, lahat ng ating management systems, lahat ng processes sa institution man, sa small group, or even sa individual is meant to equip us from avoiding failure. And yet, Cornel West is saying na without a sense of failure, without a sense of inadequacy, without the awareness of the limits of what we can do, lahat ng posible nating ma-achieve ay para sa kanya, ayun, parang it's a kind of an empty achievement, no? It's a kind of parang orchestrated or theatrical achievement. Sabi niya kung I am paraphrasing Cornel West, yung it's something siguro that we need to recover. Na hindi lahat ng achievement is something na para bang it comes out of our ability to really push our own agenda to its completion. Merong klaseng achievement na it becomes an achievement precisely because of its limitation, precisely because of its inadequacy. And those among us who siguro are familiar with Kafka at saka yung other kinds of literature that displays or showcase yung limitation of human situation or human capacity. That's what makes us more human. And to use it to use siguro or illustrate an example closer to our profession sa pagtuturo. Hindi ba? Lahat naman siguro tayo nagpre-prepare. Let us assume na nag-prepare tayo para sa lectures natin. Pero if you come to think of it, yung mga times na nag-lecture ka, na sasabihin ng estudyante mo na mahusay sir yung pagkaka-deliver yun ng lecture na. Minsan yun yung hindi mo pinaghandaan. O minsan din yung parang pinaghandaan mo pero you didn't deliver it the way you wanted to deliver it. Or minsan yung pa yung talagang lesson na you are really struggling with your thoughts and struggling with the right words to say. Pero yun yung tumatak sa mga estudyante. Thanks to yun nga sinasabing sense of failure. I introduced that again just to delineate the position of Aquinas against Kant and Aristotle. Kasi yung discussion ni Aquinas doon sa grace highlights that. Para sa kanya, yung becoming magnanimous, becoming virtuous is not achieved by the human person precisely because he has this tremendous capacity. On the other hand, ironically, the person in Aquinas' view becomes virtuous precisely because of his keen awareness of the limits of what he can do. Kung sa tingin ng tao na siya ay superhero, na siya ay lahat magagawa ko in 3 to 6 months, babaguhin ko yan. Then he's not virtuous in the eyes of Aquinas. Parang gano'n. So doon muna, baka masyado na ako marami na akong sinabi. Salamat.
So thank you for that po, Doc Jovi, sa pag-differentiate. Actually po may bago ngayon, yung 4 to 5 years lahat ng squatter daw may bahay. Luma na yung
Next 10 na kasi.
Oh.
3 to 5 months.
Sige po. Thank you for that, Doc Jovi. I think also one thing that we should remember, I mean, the obvious difference, or I'm just spotting the obvious here, between Aquinas and Aristotle. I mean, this was mentioned by Doc Jovi. I just want to re-emphasize it. The role of God in that whole, I mean, how everything operates, like independence and community and all of these things, because we have God in the center. But I think also on that note, that is what links, I mean, this first part of presenting Aristotle's view of magnanimity and pusillanimity to Aquinas's, kasi, I mean, it becomes a bit more theological in tone here, I mean, from this point onwards, because this is actually the last part. They just have a conclusion for, a paragraph for conclusion. Maybe we could call Romel, kasi there are 3 people assigned for this, so maybe we could start with Romel because I think also Romel wanted to respond po dun sa ni-raise ni Doc Pao. So maybe we could start with Romel. Dito ba sa? Ayan. Hello? Romel?
Hello, naririnig ako?
Opo, okay na.
Tinanggal ko yung earphone. Di pala ako naririnig, sorry. Well, thank you kay Doc Jovi kasi minention niya na yung grace. And sinabi mo kanina, kaya mo kasi nakita mo yung philosopher ko and si von Hildebrand. Nagulat nga ako kasi tiningnan ko yung footnotes about kung saan niya kinuha yung quotation niya from von Hildebrand, and Konyndyk got it from Humility, which is actually part ng bigger book ni von Hildebrand, which is the Transformation in Christ. Nagulat lang ako kasi never minention ni von Hildebrand si Aquinas at saka si Aristotle doon sa part ng yun na humility. Maybe it's just her ang tawag dito, footnote explanation. Pero in the original text, von Hildebrand never mentioned Aquinas and Aristotle in that part of his book, or even in the entirety of the transformation in Christ, hindi niya na-mention yung dalawa. Now, going back to von Hildebrand, siguro pakilala ko lang kung sino si von Hildebrand, Dietrich von Hildebrand. Actually, when you say von Hildebrand, mag-asawa kasi sila eh. Yung naging asawa niyang pangalawa is, I think it's in page 6, 7, and 8. Yata tinutukoy ko kasi it's footnote 19 and isa footnote 19, yun yung sinasabi kong doon niya minention kung anong book yon, no? Which is wala dun si yun nga si Aristotle and Aquinas. Now, na-mention kanina nila Doc Jovi na about classroom settings. Well, si von Hildebrand, si Dietrich von Hildebrand, yung lalaki, no, the original philosopher, hindi gaya natin na he has yung kabataan niya na nag-aral sa eskwelahan. Actually, tutored siya. Nag-aral lang siya sa university ng college. So, sino nagturo sa kanya? Yung nanay niya, which is actually a Kantian scholar. So, ang kwento is, tumigil yung nanay niya na mag-aral kay Kant para turuan si von Hildebrand ng classics, literature. So, ang nangyari, it was a love for studying and not of competition. Walang grading system na ano. So, it's really an enjoyment for von Hildebrand to learn. Kaya nga yung asawa niya, yung second wife niya, si Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, pinag-compare sila ni Gabriel Marcel kasi pareho silang 1889 pinanganak. Gabriel Marcel suffered from the 19th century bourgeois education na may competition compared to von Hildebrand na it was a enjoyment. It was a love for studies of the classics. Now, discussion niya of humility actually is from the chapter 7 of transformation in Christ. Pero it's published, I think, or it was given a lecture nung tumatakas na siya kay Hitler. Nasa Switzerland siya, so it was delivered in a private setup. So it was a long project kasi 1933 pa lang, he is already thinking of humility. Actually, he started with reverence as the mother of virtue, and then in transformation in Christ, he referred to humility as, quoting Saint Francis de Sales, as the humility as the mother and font, okay, of all virtue. So now, maybe ganun yung naisip ni Dr. Konyndyk, and with the magnanimity, may explanation dyan si von Hildebrand. Though he didn't use the word magnanimity, ang ginamit niya is the normal person and the average person. Sabi niya, the one that we should follow is the normal person. Actually, kailan ko lang siya natutunan kasi umattend ako ng online von Hildebrand class. Hindi ko actually, nababasa ko yung normal person, but what does he mean when you say normal person? Sabi ni Dr. Rebecca from St. Andrews University, the normal person is actually the norm, which the norm is referring to Christ. So kaya transformation in Christ, von Hildebrand is actually already encouraging or teaching a kind of a virtue espoused in the likeness of Christ. Okay. So talagang it's somehow already showing a kind of parallelism with what Dr. Konyndyk is saying. I just want to have an example with Sir Pau. Sabi niya recognition, mutual recognition. Actually, von Hildebrand's experience with his noble family, kasi they are German nobility, part of the nobility, is that there is some sort of recognition, a mutual recognition, since there is no competition. Siya lang yung nag-iisang lalaki kasi the rest are girls. When his father actually reprimanded him, bakit siya lumabas kasama ng mga kapatid niya, and it's in the late hour, and then he's allowed by his father to answer back. Sabi niya, I don't see anything wrong about it. If you cannot explain it to me, I will not follow you. So there's some sort of recognition given to von Hildebrand. Parang yung ni Father Ferriols na nagkakaroon ng talaban, that the response actually changes you. There's a sort of interdependence between the two individuals, that the other is not just interdependence in the same that may talab sa'yo yung sasabihin ko. Okay. If I'm making any sense. And with regards to humility and magnanimity, or this soul, what's this? Ano nga ba ulit yun? Strong-souled person, it's actually a person of reverence who is open to the world of values. Hindi closed yung niya, yung pag-iisip niya. And makikita yan sa ethics ni von Hildebrand, sa book niya on ethics. Pero there is a certain rigor, a questioning. Hindi lang yung tanggap ka ng tanggap. Siguro mabalik tayo sa ni Father Ferriols na talaban. By the way, Dietrich von Hildebrand is Father Ferriols' teacher in Fordham way back in the 50s. Now, as I was saying about humility, naalala ko nung sinabi ni Dr. ko na the Greeks hates humility because it says something which you are not. Yung kasi 'di ba humus, from the word humus, which is lupa, parang pinapaano mo ang tawag dito, pinapababa mo yung sarili mo, but it's a Christian virtue na you are seeing a greater being than you are, and this greater being is the source of all beauty, of all redemption, no, na marireceive mo. And he says here, sabi ni Konyndyk, is humility apart from God, I am nothing. It's, I think, in page 8. And he says that, hindi ko kabisado, magnanimity, okay, and magnanimity says that he has called me by my name and I am his. Therefore, he is able to to do immeasurably more than all I ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within me. So, sinabi niya din dito ni Dr. Konyndyk, there's a supernatural perspective required. So you are open revelation of the existence of God. Okay? And because of that, so minention niya yung the mistakes of I don't know what page is this. Hindi ko na. Pero sa bandang hulihan to, yung the mistake of pusillanimous person. So there are three folds. He said, to whom are they listening? Against, to whom are they assuring themselves? On whom they are relying? So this opens up for some sort of ontology, and at the same time, how can you be ang tawag dito, certain, and that certainness opens for some openness for God, which is the source of all values, no? Kasi ang explanation din ni von Hildebrand, God, the values are the reflection, makikita mo ang Diyos through values. Okay, so dyan muna, and then I'll try to make responses then if
Sige.
there
Thank you
are
for that.
some questions. Ha?
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Romel.
Okay.
Siguro, para lang just to give others also an idea lang, I just want to highlight this, itong also as a bridge. The main difference between Aristotelian and Thomistic magnanimity is that for Aquinas, this virtue and its operation are possible only through God's gift of grace, a gift for which we are dependent on a God who is greater and more powerful than we. Magnanimity is thus fundamentally conceived in terms of vocation and stewardship. Vocation and stewardship. It is a response to God's call and a willingness to use His gifts. I mean, just for us to get the undertone of what Roman has been sharing to us. As Aquinas says, magnanimity makes us deem ourselves worthy of great things in consideration of the gifts we hold from God. Thus, if our souls are endowed with great virtue, magnanimity makes us tend to perfect works of virtue. The Apostle Paul expresses the heart of magnanimity when he says, I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. I mean, for us to better understand, I mean, say Romel gave us different images also, of course, centering on Dietrich von Hildebrand of magnanimity, and also with hints of Father Ferrios's yung isa talaban niya. But I think that it's also that, I mean, in contrast to Aristotle's view of a very self-reliant person, right? Hindi a magnanimous person for Aquinas would not be one just by him or herself self-reliant, but one dependent. In fact, one dependent. So virtue for Aquinas is a gift of grace, not something we accomplish on our own, but something given to us. Thus, so when Aquinas frames magnanimity as a part of fortitude, he describes the confidence of a magnanimous person as a hope and faith in someone who is willing to help us, i.e., God. Magnanimity thus requires trust not in ourselves, but in God's assistance. Okay. Maybe Paolo also would want to add to what Romel has provided for us. Is Paolo here?
Yeah. Am I heard?
Yeah. Hi, Paolo.
Okay. Thank you, Anton. So taking off from around that page, I think I'm on page 6. So with the general conception in mind, we see how Aquinas' account of magnanimity transforms Aristotle's understanding of self-reliance, self-value, and the measure of greatness. So those are the three things that Aquinas responds to something that I think Romel gave in summary earlier. So first is self-reliant. So in the first chapter, Aquinas privileges Augustine's definition of virtue. It is talking about grace. Virtue. A good quality of the soul by which we live rightly, which God works in us without our help. Virtue for Aquinas is a gift of grace, not something we accomplish on our own. So I think this is a good jumping point in our study of Aquinas, in that he's not, because when I study Aquinas sometimes and I read commentaries, sometimes people make him come off as a competitor to Augustine's theology, and perhaps that's something that history would also try to portray. But the fact that he uses Augustine and a lot of his thinking is in similar, I don't want to say the same, but in a similar sort of mind frame, trying to coalesce our reason and faith, shows that Augustine and Aquinas complement each other and aren't necessarily competitors in trying to explain theology through reason. So when he frames magnanimity as a part of fortitude, he describes the confidence of a magnanimous person as a hope and faith in someone who is willing to help us. So yung katulad na sinabi kanina nila Doc Jovi and Doc Paulo, the dependence is an important aspect in how Aquinas tries to frame the magnanimous person or Christian magnanimity. Na we're not relying on ourselves, but on God. For me, since I'm a seminarian, Anton and I were contemporaries in the seminary. When I try to explain how a vocation is to an aspirant, somebody aspiring to be a seminarian, I sometimes try to tell them that it's not always about doing great things for God. It's about letting God do great things through you, acknowledging that we can't really do everything on our own, that there's somebody else there who uses us as an instrument for goodness. I also try to say that it's not about letting Christ into your life, it's about letting yourself fall into Christ's life. So the dependence that we feel towards God is what Augustine and Aquinas are trying to tell us. So like what Romel said earlier, the question of whether I feel unworthy, quoting von Hildebrand, is beside the point. That God has called me is the one thing that matters. So that spoke to me because still as a seminarian, giving, there's the temptation for me that I'm giving myself to the church, I'm giving myself to the people, I'm giving myself, I'm taking myself away from my family, but that's not really the point. The point is that God has called me, God calls us, and that's all that matters. We respond. The response itself is also a gift. So actually, I think in the next paragraph, for God's power is to be efficacious, we must be willing to receive God's gracious assistance, to receive it as a gift, and to trust what is needful will be given. Towards the end of that paragraph, we read, thus to the presumptuous person, God says, you cannot do this on your own. And to those overwhelmed by a sense of their own inadequacy, God says, you don't have to do this on your own. So at the beginning of the essay, there are two vices that Professor Konyndyk talks about. So the vice of presumptiveness and the pusillanimity. So to the presumptuous person, who assumes that, and maybe the presumptuous person closely coincides with the Aristotelian megalosukos. God says, you cannot do this on your own. And to those who have the pusillanimous inadequacy, God says you don't have to do this on your own. And this inadequacy can maybe also arises from the false understanding of what humility is. Maybe this is something that we can relate to, that the idea of a classroom was given earlier na hindi muna ako magsasalita kasi baka may gusto magsalita na mas marunong pa sa akin. So following Aquinas' reconception of magnanimity in terms of vocation and stewardship, this virtue points beyond the self in two ways. First, we are gifted by God because we are called for the service of his kingdom according to his purposes. And next paragraph, and furthermore, because the magnanimous person depends on God's power and goodness for her great achievement, she must also give credit where credit is due. So acknowledging that there is a mission, that there is something for us to do, and also giving credit where credit is due. Her greatness points to God's greatness and gives God glory. What is repugnant to many of us in Aristotle's portrait of the magnanimous man, the way he glorifies his own self-produced superiority, is thus rejected on Aquinas' account. The false sense that when it comes to virtue and the pursuit of vocation, we are on our own, for better or for worse, leads to presumption or pusillanimity. If, on the other hand, we position ourselves as dependent on God and assess our abilities in terms of his gifts to us, we avoid both forms of improper independence. So much for self-reliance. And the second, self-value. So turning to our second point, Aquinas' account of magnanimity also radically undermines the comparative value of the self. As Aquinas puts it, there is in us something great which we possess as a gift from God, and something defective which accrues to us through the weakness of our nature. So our weakness of inadequacy is answered by humility, which lives in acknowledgement that human beings are separated from God by an almost unbridgeable chasm between creator and creature. God is the source of all goodness, and without God, we are not just defective, we are nothing. So I think that points to the scholastic metaphysics of God as the foundation of everything. But importantly for Aquinas, human beings are the crown of creation, and we can participate in the divine life of God himself. To live according to this view of ourselves is magnanimity. So both virtues are required to tell the truth about us. So the virtue of humility and magnanimity. Going down a few paragraphs.
Just to give an idea for the rest, I'll just pause for a bit. So what Rebecca Konyndyk is doing here is to point out three things, just to recap what we're doing right here. Self-reliance, because she's trying to show how Aristotle's view of that magnanimous person is in fact a vice. I mean, from the point of view of Aquinas. So self-reliance, and then secondly, it is a self-value, the idea of self-value, and then the third would be the measure of greatness. Okay, so I mean, it's just those three. Okay, Paulo, please continue.
Okay, thank you. So going just the paragraph right above that, the measure of greatness towards the end. If my ultimate, Professor Konyndyk is talking about our accountability now, how because of self-value, sometimes we say we're accountable to other people, but shifting our paradigm, she says, if my ultimate accountability is to God, then my assessment of my worth and abilities vis-a-vis others is conditioned and limited by my standing before Him. When I read that, what popped immediately into my mind was the three spheres in Kierkegaardian ethics. So the aesthetic sphere, the ethical sphere, and then the religious sphere. And in the last sphere, where we view ourselves, somebody can feel free to correct me because I didn't study Kierkegaard in depth. The third sphere of religious ethics, where the religious sphere where we imagine ourselves as naked before God, that God sees everything. So in the sense, Konyndyk, in that sense, we measure ourselves only by what God measures, and that's something we'll also look at later. So acknowledging this new vertical measure as opposed to the horizontal measure before. Uh, so we're looking at this measure as measuring ourselves to the standard of God instead of the standard of other people. We measure our own worth and works, uh, relieves the anxiety and despair that paralyzes the pusillanimous person into inaction. So the measure of greatness. So I think this was spoken about earlier. I'll skip to the last paragraph in this page. Yung Aquinas has Christ himself in mind as the exemplar of virtue. So for Aquinas, Jesus Christ is the the man among men. So as he writes in the ethical portion of the Summa Theologiae. But Professor Konyndyk would also like to look at the example of the Virgin Mary as an example of how Aristotelian magnanimity is Christianized. So her example helps us see how magnanimity is not only a virtue of acknowledged dependence, but also one compatible with humility, which the Greeks, or ancient Greeks, thought of as mere debasement. Christian magnanimity is not only for a male upper class moral elite. Great acts are now open to anyone willing to answer God's call and accept his grace. So Professor Konyndyk, when she uses Mary as an example, it's also because she wants to step away from, I don't want to use the word patriarchy, but I guess I just did use it. So the male-dominated world in how the virtuous person is looked like. So even if we look at the word virtue itself, it has the first three letters vir, so man in Latin. So there's always the sense that it always refers to the masculine, the male sex, and Konyndyk, separating from that, always wants to look at Mary because in page 9, Mary shows us that true greatness comes from looking to God for one's ultimate sense of worthiness. So in this paragraph, she recounts how Mary refers to herself as the handmaid of the Lord. So there's a footnote, footnote 35, or there's a superscript 35, and you can find that in the notes. For handmaid, the Greek word was dole or dule, which literally translates into slave, so a female slave. So Mary, in her lowliness, refers to herself as a slave of the Lord. But as the story unfolds, Mary acknowledges also that because she looks at herself in this way, because of her lowliness, God has blessed her and will continue to bless her. So Mary sees herself rightly when she looks to the true source of her worthiness, her honor, and her ability to do great things. She is great on account of what the Lord has done for and through her, and she proclaims it through her Magnificat. The mistakes of the pusillanimous person are threefold then, as mentioned earlier: to whom they are listening, against whom they are measuring themselves, and on whom they are relying. So for Mary, greatness was fundamentally defined by God's favor and not by the expectations of others. Moreover, she accepted the great task to which she was called out of absolute trust in God's power and dependence on God's grace. And earlier it's mentioned that this is in spite of the social stigma that she might have faced during that time. I'm not sure if anyone's watched the movie Jesus of Nazareth. It's a fairly old movie. And then there's a scene where Mary's talking to her parents, and then they ask her, "Oh, were you raped by a Roman soldier? What happened? Why are you pregnant?" And Mary just simply says, "I have broken no law," because she knows that she was right, that this is a gift from God, and that in spite of the social stigma from maybe her parents, the people around her, even Saint Joseph, she did not want to cop into societal pressures to say that she was wrong. Uh, she understands that she has something to do, and in her lowliness, God has still chosen her to be great. And I think that's where I can end.
Thank you for that, Paolo. Yes, thank you for that. That's why we see also yung with that last line, to whom, against whom, and on whom. I mean that also those three represent the three sections that Konyndyk would want to emphasize. So that idea of self-reliance, so self-reliance, and then self-value, and the measure of greatness. So to whom they're listening, against whom they're measuring themselves, and on whom they're relying. So from the self as that measure to God as that measure. So we clearly see that transition. That's why before I mentioned call Doc Jovi, that's why I mean mentioned in the song or recited by Mary or sang by Mary. Perhaps we have that. It's very beautiful. I mean, cast down the mighty from their thrones, lift up the lowly, fill the hungry good things, riches sent away empty. Servant. I mean, I am the handmaid of the Lord, and let it be done to me. She says. But my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord, because in my loneliness, God has exalted me. Okay, so I will stop. Doc Jovi and then Jim, and then we could conclude.
Thank you, Anton. Napansin ko mag-aalas 10 na eh. Sisingit lang ako ng konti. Pero this is more a response to Rommel rather than Paulo. Siyempre, hindi naman ako von Hildebrandian scholar, so I might be wrong. Pero gusto ko lang bigyan ng pansin yung binabanggit ni Rommel kanina tungkol sa talaban. Medyo that word has always been identified with Father Ferriols. Pero I'm not sure if yung ganong talaban as described by Rommel can square with what Konyndyk was trying to explain in this essay. Kasi when you say talaban, it suggests a kind of symmetry, di ba? Yung sinasabi nga ni Rommel kanina na parang there is a kind of a exchange or commerce existing between two entities or two individuals. Pero yung what Konyndyk was trying to present in her reading of Aquinas, yun yung ganong symmetry o talaban, yung impossible. Yung symmetry can happen in the way Aristotle or in the way Aristotle wanted to illustrate how a person becomes magnanimous. Kasi all you need to do is to appropriate a set of standards, di ba? And once you do it, once you personify or embrace these standards, you become magnanimous. Kaya nga, to use probably an example closer to Nietzsche, how does a slave become a master? By transcending himself, di ba? And later on becomes a master himself. Pero dun sa dinidevelop ni Konyndyk, yung ganong klaseng yung very ironic eh. In the context of Aquinas, a person becomes great, being magnanimous, precisely by becoming not great. If you get the drift. Kasi yung someone who's aspiring to be great and becomes great, para kay Aquinas, hindi yun magnanimous. A person becomes great precisely because of his inability to be great, because of his incapacity to be great. At least great in the eyes of the common standards, parang ganon. So yung ganong, kaya ako nagre-respond kay Romer, kasi nga yung greatness in the context of Aquinas is underlined by that great asymmetry. Gusto mo maging mabuting anak, pero hindi ka magiging perfectong anak. Pero in the process of you aspiring to become a perfect son or daughter, and realizing that you won't ever be, and yet you continue to try doing it or becoming it, doon ka nagiging great. Malaki yung chasm ng between what I'm doing and what I want to be kay Aquinas. Hindi ganun kalaki kay Aristotle. Kaya nga parang sabi ni Konyndyk yung kanyang conclusion in the end parang yung notion ni Aristotle ng megalosukos ay parang pusillanimity rin dahil the standards are so petty. Compared mo yan doon sa what Aquinas is trying to explore, that the goal of becoming magnanimous is something that no one can ever achieve. Siyempre, doon papasok kanyang theological discourse, no? without the aid of God. Pero wag na natin muna pag-usapan yon kasi kulang na tayo ng oras. Pero yun lang yung dinidevelop ko kanina, na yung sense of inadequacy, yung sense of incapacity is something that is crucial to Aquinas' notion of the great souled man. Kasi someone who thinks he can be great will never be great. But someone who thinks, despite his incapacity or inadequacy, tries to, this is an important, tries to donate himself or herself out of that sense of incapacity, siya yung in a sense great in quotation marks. Kaya nga for Aquinas, the choice is not just limited between becoming a master and becoming a slave. There is a third option. At binanggit ni Konyndyk yung term na yun, becoming a steward. A steward is someone who can donate himself or herself despite his admission that he'll never be great. And I'd like to end with yung, I think yung parable tungkol dun sa widow's mite. If yung mga galing sa seminaryo, siguro natatandaan pa ito. Yung rich man at saka yung widow, the rich man donated huge sum of money. And the widow donated everything that she has. At sabi ng gospel, between the two, it is the widow who gave more, because the rich man donated his money, but the widow donated herself. She was the steward. She became great because out of her recognition that she could never be great, she nonetheless proceeded to donate herself. So, yun lang po. Maraming salamat.
Thank you. Before po I call Jim, just very quick. Actually, Doc, sabi ni Deleuze, hindi daw talaga pwede. I mean, kahit daw mabago, the slave will still remain a slave. Kasi kaya tumingin kasi yung putin dito sa court burger. The slave remains a slave kahit ano. Pero po, I mean,
I'm just alluding to yung bang average perception ng, kasi ganun yung kaya when they become masters, they think like slaves pa rin. Kasi precisely because of that insight from Deleuze, no? Some people think that just because of a certain change in their social stature or a new degree acquired from the university or a promotion in the salary, suddenly they would elevate them in the hierarchy of mastery. Pero tama yung sinabi mo. There's no such there's no such thing. Sige, ayoko na i-pursue yun. Ating gabihin tayo.
Kalaban kasi nga nasa level lang ng slave. Hindi, pero mamaya na. Si Jim lang, tapos sige, Romel, very quick response na kay Doc, and then we finish.
So just a short reflection on Doc Jovi's sharing regarding the sense of failure kanina earlier. So this human inadequacy, this sense of the ephemeral, this sense of fallibility, or we can call our fragility as human beings. So makes us acknowledge our dependence to someone, or it opens us to a higher standard of greatness or even truth. And in this particular instance, Aquinas highlights man's dependence on God. So this dependence implies that virtue or goodness or even greatness is not a competitive quest, but more of a collaborative work with others. So this dependence makes us receptive to grace, not strictly of religious grace, but more of human generosity. So this dependence becomes an interdependence. And I think this concept of interdependence ushers us to Aquinas ethics, particularly on his concept of the common good. So yun lang yung insight ko.
Sige. Maraming salamat, Jim. Sige, Romel.
Hindi, my reaction lang is, I think von Hildebrand and as well as Father Ferriols doesn't think the way of that kind of symmetry. Siguro it's like an interpersonal tayo as friend, but it doesn't like the way how you explain it in the delusion or borrowing from Nietzsche. Hindi ganon. And I agree with Dr. Carino na there is a need, a donation. Actually, even von Hildebrand says there's a self-donation to the other. That he cannot fill in the gaps. May ganung sort of, hindi sort of, may ganung tone of humility na ine-espouse si von Hildebrand, but I think it's mas mahabang talakayan ng kailangan. Yun lang.
Thank you, Romel. Siguro just to conclude, kasi we've discussed a lot, I'll just read this, itong naka-highlight. Aquinas introduces into magnanimity a new kind of other relatedness and another layer of dependence that transforms both our view of ourselves and our relationships with others. I mean, so it's in that context that we're able to re-understand the difference between magnanimity and pusillanimity. And also, I mean, one's engagement in society, one's dependence on God, and so on and so forth. So with that, we end tonight's Noche session. I'm extremely thankful to all of you who've attended, and especially those that we've assigned, those who've asked and who were able to join the participation. So thank you po once again, and hope to see you all next month. May Noche session pa po tayo next month. Maraming salamat po. Ingat po kayo. Happy weekend.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat.
Happy weekend. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.